Welcome to a brand new episode of Law and Batting Order. I'm your host, Tony Iliakostas. Here are some quick hits from the past 2 weeks. The MLB All-Star Game is around the corner and the rosters have been assembled. The Midsummer Classic, which is pretty much Christmas for all baseball fans, features some of the best talent around the league. Since the game will be held in Citi Field, home of my hometown New York Mets, Mets fans will see Captain David Wright and pitching sensation Matt Harvey represent the blue and orange. And because this is New York, I would be remiss to not give a shout out to Yankee closer Mariano Rivera, who will be going to his last MLB All-Star Game. Other notable players going to this year's All-Star Game are reigning AL MVP Miguel Cabrera, current AL MVP candidate Chris Davis, and former Met and current Cardinal Carlos Beltran. I was a Nets fan back in the day when the team played in New Jersey. Seeing the success of the team with Jason Kidd, Kerry Kittles, and Kenyon Martin was great, but it had to endure many years of suffering when the team had losing seasons. But since the move to Brooklyn, the Nets have rebranded themselves and have made themselves a hot commodity in the NBA. This became apparent so far this offseason as the Nets have made some official trades and signings official. This week, the Nets completed a trade with the Celtics that sends Paul Pierce, Jason Terry, and Kevin Garnett to the Nets in exchange for some draft picks and other Nets players. The Nets didn't stop there as they made a huge steal in picking up Andrei Kirilenko to a 2-year deal worth $3 million. While we have yet to see this monstrosity of a team play, it looks like the Nets will battle for the ultimate crown, the NBA Championship Trophy. History was made at Wimbledon last Sunday as one of Britain's very own won the men's Wimbledon title. Hometown kid Andy Murray battled Novak Djokovic in the title match. While the battle was tough, Andy Murray beat number 1 seeded Djokovic in 3 sets. Murray's win at Wimbledon brought cheers to Britain as Murray became the first British player to win Wimbledon in 77 years and the first Scottish tennis player of either sex to win Wimbledon in 117 years. Over on the women's side, French player Marion Bartoli took home the women's Wimbledon title, beating Sabine Lichty in 2 sets. Today's Order in the Court will discuss the role that sponsorships play in sports. Whether you go to a football stadium or a baseball field, you're bound to see some type of signage belonging to a popular beverage company or office appliance store. And especially in this day and age with superstar athletes becoming worldwide phenomena, sponsors come knocking on those players' doors and ask them to be the face of their product. But what goes exactly into a sponsorship deal, and what are some of the legal concerns that come up in sponsorship deals? To help us understand the business of sports and sponsorships, it is my privilege and honor to introduce Rob Cardenas, who is an attorney based in Las Vegas. In addition to being a personal injury litigator, he is also an MMA agent and runs the top booking agency for UFC Talent called MMA Appearances, and has dealt with endorsement and sponsorship deals in the MMA. Rob, welcome to Law and Batting Order. How's it going, man?
Hey, thanks for having me on, Tony. I really appreciate the opportunity.
My pleasure. Now, let me just make a disclaimer that we are entering the octagon of sports law, but I'm by no means a John Bones Jones or Anderson Silva or Chris Weidman. So even though I'm not as talented as those guys, I'm sure we'll have a great discussion.
No, I'm sure we will, and I appreciate, again, the opportunity. It's an honor and privilege to be on the show.
Thank you very much. So why don't we just start with a little introduction. Tell the audience a little bit about the legal work that you do, including the sponsorship work that you've done in the past.
Sure. I'm a personal injury litigator in Las Vegas with the law firm of Benson, Bertoldo, Baker & Carter, an AV-rated personal injury firm here. I've been practicing law in Nevada for approximately 13 years. The entirety of my career from a legal standpoint has been involved in litigation practice. The first half of my career, I was an insurance defense attorney representing insureds and insurance companies in third-party, first-party, and complex litigation. The latter half of my career, which has encompassed the last approximately 6.5 years, I've represented plaintiffs in personal injury actions. About 5 years ago, I was retained by UFC fighter and MMA legend Vanderlei Silva to serve as his attorney to negotiate a license and merchandising agreement with the UFC. it was the first time I had ever been involved in the representation of an athlete on any level. And as a result of that relationship, not only did I negotiate the merchandising agreement, but I eventually ended up renegotiating a new promotional agreement for him. And then through that work, it led me to relationships with other high-level professional athletes within their organization. I've been retained either informally or formally in various capacities by some of the top guys in the organization, whether it's as their attorney, as their sponsorship agent, or from a business management standpoint. So over the last 5 years, I've had a lot of specialized experience both in representing athletes and securing and negotiating endorsements, sponsorship fees, sponsorship agreements, appearance fees, and the like. But I've also represented brands and companies as well that have retained me for purposes of negotiating, drafting, and finalizing endorsement agreements with various brand ambassadors on their behalf. So I've had experience on both sides, so to speak.
Well, that's phenomenal, and at least exactly right. The fact that you have experience on both sides really makes you attentive and aware of what really goes into these sponsorship deals. So essentially, you know what's the interest of one party, and you know what's the interest of the other party. And we'll get to all of that in a little bit later and more later in the program. Let's start with the really broad question regarding sponsorships in sports. I can't begin to tell you how many times I've gone to a stadium, and you can attest to this as well, how many times you've gone to a stadium, and the first thing you see is something like, Coca-Cola, the beverage of Major League Baseball, or, Aquafina, the water of the NFL, whatever the case is. I'm just rattling off names, but it's almost like sponsorships and sports go hand in hand. How important are sponsorships in sports? Are they the fuel that powers sports, or are they pretty much secondary?
Well, I think they're vitally important, both in regards to the athletes themselves, as well as the organization and the entities such as the NFL. So, breaking that down, you got the sponsorships are important to the NFL. They're important to the individual teams within the NFL, and they're also important to the players that participate on those respective teams. And that applies to any sport, whether you're talking Major League Baseball, NBA, NFL, NHL, or even what I deal with most predominantly, the UFC. And the reason, is because sponsorships are relied upon to create a bigger and better brand and bigger product, because the sponsorship dollars can be utilized for exposure purposes, for funding marketing measures, for advertising and the like. For the athletes themselves, there are many athletes who could earn their earnings from an endorsement standpoint or a sponsorship standpoint equal, if not exceed, what they're paid from their organization or the promotion in which they compete. So they are important all across the board. And I just took my family last 2 or 3 weeks ago down to San Diego to attend a ball game, and it's Petco Field.
Right.
It used to be where you would go to Jack Murphy Stadium in San Diego, and now it's Qualcomm. So sponsorships are huge, and what it does is a sponsorship for the arenas or the ball fields themselves. What they do, I think that everybody as a whole benefits. From a team perspective, sponsorships are important because they're getting this funding, this influx of capital. And that also trickles down to the fan, because if the organization is able to get high sponsorship dollars, they can pass that benefit down to their fan base by reducing ticket pricing. So there's a benefit that I think we all experience subtly, but in the most, you're talking about the athletes as well that are able to supplement, if not significantly increase or substantiate their earning capabilities on a per game basis or an annual basis. So I think it's vitally important.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. So in the sponsorship deals that you've been a part of, you said that you deal primarily with UFC Talent, so it's been with MMA, the MMA scene really. And given the legal background that you have, I'm sure when you enter into a sponsorship deal, you look at a contract differently than someone who may lack the legal education necessary to, I guess, look out for any sort of hidden clauses or any of that legalese that's really essential in a lot of these contracts that you find in this day and age. How valuable is that legal education when you enter into sponsorship negotiations?
Well, I think it's, for me personally, having a legal background gave me a lot of comfort and security in approaching and dealing with people. Obviously, you're very well aware of this, being a current student yourself. You know, you get an education in contract law, you get accustomed to certain provisions and terms, some of which may be boilerplate. Having a legal background gives you credibility when dealing with a brand, dealing with a potential sponsor, or even dealing with an athlete. Because right, wrong, or indifferent, having an ESQ at the end of your name does increase your credibility in certain instances. And people tend to treat you with a different level of professionalism and a different level of respect. And it's given me a lot of comfort and security and confidence in any situation that I've entered into, whether it's on behalf of an athlete or whether it's on behalf of a brand. So being familiar with legal concepts, legal terms, provisions, and then, you know, as a law student and then ultimately as a lawyer, we're accustomed to analyzing issues, reviewing materials, sometimes in mass amounts, and having to have the ability and the responsibility of not only reviewing that material, digesting that material, but understanding that material and being able to articulate it when needed. So I think all of those are vitally important in approaching, an endorsement negotiation or a sponsorship negotiation.
Absolutely, and I can't begin to tell you how much in law school they really stress the importance of really looking at all the details of a contract. I just wrapped up a drafting contracts class with actually former guest of Law and Batting Order, my professor David Fish, and he's all about looking at the contract and seeing every last provision he possibly can. So I absolutely agree with you in that regard, and I actually look forward to the day when I can review those contracts having that knowledge in mind. So when you enter into a sponsorship deal, what are the primary goals that you look to accomplish? And I know that you said that you had experience both from the corporate side of things when you represent a company, and also when you represent an athlete, in this case a UFC fighter. So maybe touch on both sides of the table. What are some of the goals or the objectives that you look for when you enter into a deal?
Sure. I think independent of which side you're on or which party you're representing, the ultimate goal and primary responsibility is protecting their interests. So if I'm approaching an agreement from the standpoint of the athlete, I want to obviously protect their interests. I want to carefully review the agreement to make sure that the scope is clearly defined, whether it's an exclusive deal, whether the territory is clearly defined, and by that I mean, is this a worldwide deal or is this limited to a particular country? I want to make sure that the term is clear. Is it an annual deal? Is it 12 months? Is it 18 months? And obviously you want the compensation to be clearly delineated. You know this from having taken contract law, that if you draft a contract, that any ambiguities in the agreement could be held against you as the drafter. So Absolutely. When I'm representing an athlete, I would prefer at times to not be the drafter of the agreement, but rather receive the endorsement and review it myself and make the necessary changes. However, if I'm dealing with a new brand that I know is relying heavily on me, I'm representing the athlete, but I'm dealing with a new brand, I may offer to draft the agreement, because at that point I want to make sure that from a preliminary standpoint, my client, the athlete, is primarily protected first and foremost. So I think that's the most important thing, is to make sure, if you're representing an athlete, that you want to make sure that the scope is defined clearly, the term is defined clearly. There are certain boilerplate terms in every agreement, but there are also very substantive provisions and terms that you got to pay close attention to. Now, if I'm representing a brand, I want to make sure that I maximize the return on the investment. I want to make sure that the exposure that I'm getting is as great as possible. I want to make sure primarily or ideally that we're getting exclusivity, meaning that if we're in the category of apparel, I want to be the only apparel company. If we're in the category of an energy drink or supplement, nutritional supplement, I want to make sure that we have exclusivity in those respective categories. So I want to make sure that it's expansive. You know, the scope of the agreement is expansive, whereas if you're representing an athlete, you may want it to be a little restrictive, right? Because maybe I want to do a deal with, I'm representing an athlete, and I say, you know what, this company has energy drinks and supplement line. Well, I want to limit it to energy drinks, and I want to maximize the amount of dollars I can get from an endorsement standpoint solely for energy drinks, because that will then enable me to go out and get a separate supplement deal that will pay my client additional money. However, if I'm representing the brand, and I'm not the same energy drink company that has a supplement line, I want, ideally, to have exclusivity in the categories of both energy drink and supplement, and attempt to pay one fee rather than two separate fees. So in addition to that, as the brand, you want to make sure that there are outs in case there's a breach of the agreement, in case the athlete doesn't meet his contractual obligations or responsibilities. You want to protect the brand from or enable the brand from a contractual standpoint to extricate itself from the situation if need be, if warranted. So, and I think that, you know, there are certain things like defining what a breach of contract may be, a morality clause, etc., that you would probably want to attempt to be included if you're representing the brand, whereas if you were representing the athlete in negotiations with the brand, you may want to avoid those sorts of provisions.
Right, and I am absolutely so glad that you brought up the whole morality clause issue, because it's funny, studying sports law and then just studying contract law more specifically, morals clauses have been sort of like the hottest topic, and seeing headlines lately about, you know, sponsors dropping endorsement deals with athletes just instantly makes me think morals clauses. And I think of recently Aaron Hernandez being dropped by Muscle Milk. I think of a few months ago, I think maybe even a year ago, Rashard Mendenhall losing Haynes after a tweet about Osama bin Laden being killed by the SEAL Team 6. You know, things like that. It just instantaneously makes me think of morals clauses. And I have to think that that's almost one of the biggest issues or the biggest topics that are discussed in these sponsorship deals. So what role do the morals clauses play in sponsorship deals, and are they what make or break the deals?
Well, right. I mean, excellent point, and some really pointed examples that you brought up. You know, the morality clauses, I wouldn't say that they're a new issue, but I certainly agree with you that they're kind of the hot topic. In other words, when I started out doing sponsorships and endorsements 5-6 years ago, the morality clauses were few and far between. Like, you would rarely see them because it wasn't necessarily an issue. But contract law and contract issues are an ever evolving process because things come up.
Absolutely.
And when they're litigated or disputed is oftentimes when they're not covered in the agreement, right? There's either some ambiguity or there's some uncertainty as to how the contract should be interpreted or applied. So, you know, the morality clauses for me, again, this kind of goes back to my previous point. It really depends on which side I'm on. If I'm representing the athlete, I would prefer to not have a morality clause in place because, because it is inherently at times ambiguous as to what is, morality.
Right.
How could you breach a morality clause? And I don't want to run the risk of my client or athlete doing something either stupid, intentionally or unintentionally, or in violation of that clause that is going to violate the agreement and ultimately result in them not getting paid, and equally important, me not getting paid. Because as an agent, you're paid on a commission basis.
Mm-hmm.
Your job is not the minute your client signs the endorsement agreement. I wish it was that easy. I wish you could have the client sign it for a year, and then for that year, you just sit back and collect a check.
Right.
It doesn't work that way. Your job as an agent or business manager oftentimes is holding the hand of the athlete, babysitting the athlete, and babysitting that contract to ensure that they're doing what it is that they need to do contractually to satisfy the agreement, and more importantly, not violate the agreement, because their finances are tied to that, and importantly, and I would argue oftentimes more importantly, our financials are tied to that. So if I'm acting on behalf of the athlete, I like to avoid them. If I'm representing the brand, again, it's something that I like to have included. But again, you got to be careful that it's a very clearly defined provision, and the terms are defined, because you don't want to run the risk of there being any ambiguity. And the last point I'll make with respect to the morality clause is that whether I'm representing the athlete or the brand, I don't want the morality clause to be a deal breaker. In other words, if the brand is dead set on the only way we're going to do this deal is with a morality clause, I try not to allow that to be a deal breaker. I try to, at that point, clearly define it, get some language that we can mutually agree upon, and move forward. And the same applies if I was representing the brand and the athlete, it was somebody that we wanted desperately to be a brand manager, but the athlete and the athlete representative was insistent upon deleting the morality clause. It would be something that, depending on the athlete, depending on the circumstance, and probably more importantly, depending on the term and the financial compensation tied to the agreement, may advise the brand that they may wish to consider to, maybe just focus on defining the breach terms as opposed to having to absolutely include the morality clause.
Right. I absolutely agree with you in that regard. So while you are involved in sponsorship deals in the MMA scene of things, can you touch on the role of sponsorships and what role they play in a large scene like the MLB All-Star Game? And the only reason why I'm bringing this up is because we're just a few days away from that happening. What would you say that sponsorships, like the big sponsors like SiriusXM or Taco Bell or even Pepsi, would you say that those sponsors or those sponsorship deals are they similar, or are they different from the sponsorships that you deal with on a daily basis in the MMA?
Well, I think at a core level, all sponsorships are the same. And I may get some flack for saying that, and I'll expound, of course. But I think at a core level, they're all the same. By that, what I mean by that is that the sponsor wants return on their investment. They want exposure. Okay? At the end of the day, that's what they want. They want return on the investment, and they want exposure. They want a marketable situation. And for whether you're an organization, whether you're a team, or whether you're an athlete, you would like the benefits financially, as well as the exposure that the sponsor can bring you inherently. So if you're focusing specifically, we'll use your Major League Baseball and the upcoming All-Star Game as an example. And obviously the game is being played in New York, correct?
Yes.
So, I mean, their field itself is Citi Field. I mean, their field has a sponsorship. It's named after a corporate sponsor. The importance of the sponsorship relative to an All-Star Game is, again, it creates an influx of capital that enables the event to be a very high level and high production event. It creates the ability to be flexible in providing the fans a truly remarkable experience. Sponsorship dollars can be used for advertising, for merchandising, for items to be given away to VIPs, to customers, to the fan base. The sponsorship dollars can also be used to compensate the participants of the game, or the individual that may win the home run derby can win a cash prize, for example. All of these things, the sponsorships play a role in all of those things. So, again, the sponsorship dollars will benefit the event. It benefits Major League Baseball. It benefits the individual players. And it benefits the fans themselves. The more sponsorship dollars that are created, the better product and promotion of the event it results. I'll use the example of the UFC because the UFC is based here in my town, here in Las Vegas. The UFC is able to be the best fight promotion in the world because they have very good sponsor partnerships. Mm-hmm. Because they have these high-dollar sponsors that come in, like Harley Davidson and Bud Light and Science and these different companies that come in and inject capital into their promotion, they're able to put on these big events. They're able to fill 18,000 person arenas. They're able to buy television advertising to promote the event. They're able to pay fighters and their athletes additional money. They're able to hire the best employees and the best staff in the world relative to what they do. And so, and that applies to any sport. And so I think it's vital. I think it's very important. And I think that everybody, whether you're a fan, you may not even realize it, whether you're a fan, you're going to benefit. Because how many of us have ever heard of, hey, Thursday night at Dodger Stadium, the first 10,000 people that show up are going to get a miniature baseball bat? I mean, these things result oftentimes, not all the time, but oftentimes as a result of sponsorship dollars and sponsor partnerships and coming together and mutually benefiting one another. One of the things that I counsel athletes on, whether I'm representing them or whether or not I'm just giving them informal advice, is you have to create benefit for your sponsor. You have to create value for your sponsor. You have to give them more than you're contracting for. You have to want them to not only do business with you this time, but for the next contract term. And so the same thing applies if you're an organization, is that you have to create an opportunity for them to reach a massive amount of people if they're attempting to brand themselves, placing their logo on outside the stadium, placing the logo on the tickets that are sold, placing the logo and brand on the program within the arena or within the stadium or within the field. And this provides return on the investment for the sponsor. It provides exposure and marketability for the sponsor because they're wanting to build their brand and get exposure for their brand. The more money that brand can make and the more successful that brand can make, arguably the more dollars they can ultimately ingest back into the organization or to the athlete. So again, I always counsel the athletes to do right by the sponsor, do a good job on behalf of the sponsor, go above and beyond on behalf of the sponsor, because if they are happy and they are making money and being successful, then oftentimes that's going to translate in them not only renegotiating and re-upping your deal, but paying you additional monies in the process.
Definitely valuable advice and definitely the right mindset to have, especially if there's anyone who wants to enter into a sponsorship deal. So finally, it would be remiss leaving off the conversation without not asking an attorney to give advice to law school students or anyone who aspires to go into this profession. So Rob, to wrap everything up, what advice would you give any law school student or even someone who's interested in sports business who really wants to go into the sports sponsorship route? What would be some advice you'd give them?
I think, I really have kind of 5 principal guidelines that I tell people to give consideration to. I mean, there isn't a blueprint for getting into the business, and there's not a blueprint for, a tried and true blueprint, rather, for absolute success. But there are some guidelines. I would say first, you want to study the law. And whether or not that's formally going to law school or getting a legal education, or whether it's taking a contract class in undergraduate, or doing a seminar on contract law or contract negotiations, I think that familiarizing yourself with legal concepts and legal terms is very, very beneficial. Again, I don't think you need to absolutely go to law school, but certainly it doesn't hurt. Having a legal background, like I indicated earlier, has always provided me with a level of confidence and a level of security, and in dealing with other people, it established, it's created more credibility for me. So even if you did have a business management background, but are familiar in some degree with legal concepts and legal terms, I think that's very important. The second thing I would say is that you want to familiarize yourself with endorsement agreements, sponsorship agreements, promotional agreements, and the like. And the easiest way to do that is just get your hands on as many as you can. Mm-hmm. Review them and get familiar with the language. Get familiar with what the terms are. There are certain legal terms that the layperson may not understand, but if you're going to get into negotiating contracts or be involved in sports law or the representation of an athlete or a brand on any level, you're going to want to know what terms like exclusivity mean. You're going to want to know what terms like in perpetuity mean. You're going to want to know what defined scope and different levels of compensation and different ways of royalty agreements work and the like. So I think you need to get your hands on as many promotional, endorsement, sponsorship agreements as possible, review them, digest the material, and try to familiarize yourself with the terms and get a better understanding of what they are. The third thing I would say is you want to work on building personal relationships. As my dad taught me from the minute I could understand anything he was saying, was that he described to me that there's really only one business in this entire world, and that's the people business. If you can deal with people, mm-hmm. then you can do anything. Yep. And listen, if you're going to be involved in the representation of athletes, you're going to have to be good with people. You're going to have to be good with people because you're going to be representing the athlete, and you're going to be, as their representative, are going to have to be comfortable dealing with potential sponsors, professional sports organizations, potential endorsement ambassadors, potential brands. So I think you need to focus on building those personal relationships and networking within the industry or the profession. The other thing I would say, and I think that this kind of gets lost in all of it, but I think it is truly, truly important, is that you got to know the sport or the area in which you're getting into. Mm-hmm. So you say, you know what, I want to represent baseball players. Well, you better get an understanding as to baseball. Mm-hmm. You got to know what batting averages are and ERA and who led the league in batting average or different things. I think you need to know the sport. I think you need to understand the history of the sport. I think you need, and included in that, I think you need to understand and know the market. Because if you don't know the market and what the market bears within that respective sport, you put yourself at a disadvantage, but more importantly, you're putting your client at a disadvantage. Because the client wants to feel comfortable that you know what you're doing and that you're not going to undersell them or undervalue them. So I think you need to familiarize yourself with who the current sponsors are in the sport, the type of companies that are involved in the industry, as well as the companies that may benefit from immersing themselves in that particular sport. So you got to be aware of what companies may be looking for in a brand ambassador, so that you could get them or get them on board with you before they become chum in the shark-infested water, so to speak. And then the last thing I would tell anybody is that you got to just maintain a positive attitude, man. It's a cutthroat business. It's a tough business. When I got into it, there was a total lack of networking. There was a total lack of informational sharing, which I think information is empowering. I think it's a good thing and a positive thing to network and mentor. And I think that you just have to be positive, and you have to have a positive mindset, not only about the circumstances that you're dealing with presently, but where you see yourself and where you want to end up from a positional standpoint within your respective industry. Because it's a tough business, man. There's very little loyalty. Everybody's trying to get your business, or at least that's the way you're made to feel. And so, to be successful in any field as an agent or a business manager or somebody involved in the sports law arena, I think you have to go beyond just fostering a strong relationship with one or two people. I think it could begin with that, but I think you have to just be positive and be optimistic, because that will carry you through some of the tough times. And trust me, if you're in this business long enough, you're going to have plenty of tough days.
Absolutely. And especially as someone who aspires to enter that industry, I can absolutely agree with you on all of those tips that you gave, especially the networking side of things. And, especially as a third-year law school student, I strive to know as many people as I can. And even if I'm, pushy about it, I still want to know, because, again, it's just I'm ambitious, and I think that doesn't hurt. And I guess that's the best advice that you could give anyone who really wants to enter that field. But certainly some great advice about that and the industry, and more importantly, great information that you provided, Rob, on the whole sports sponsorship side of things and what you do on a daily basis with the UFC fighters. For all our viewers out there, if you want to follow Rob on Twitter, you can. His Twitter handle is at Rob Cardenas ESQ. And I'll also put the link to his website so you can check out more about Rob. Rob, thank you so much for being on Law and Batting Order.
Oh, my pleasure, man. Anytime. I love the show. I really, really love, admire, and respect what you're doing. I think it's phenomenal. It's a phenomenal resource. Anytime you need anything, bro, don't ever hesitate to reach out, whether it's formal or informal. I'm always here for you, buddy.
Thanks, Rob. Before I wrap up today's episode, I wanted to share some very important news with you all. As you know, Law and Batting Order is listed in the ABA Journal's blog directory online. Because LABO is listed in this directory, the site is eligible every year for nominations for the ABA Journal's annual Blog 100 Awards. While I tried last year to rally you guys to nominate LABO, it just wasn't enough. But I want to change that this year. In the 2012 ABA Blog 100, not a single sports law blog was listed. Let's make some noise and land LABO on the list to be a representative of the sports law community. So here's my plea. Go nuts and nominate LABO. You heard that right, Labo Nation. Let's make noise unlike any other blog audience. What makes Labo so special is that the viewers are vocal and are loyal to the site, which means that your nomination of Labo in the ABA Blog 100 would mean a win for you guys. So what can you do to help? 3 things. 1. Go to abajournal.com/blog/blog100_submit and fill out a form where you'll nominate Labo. 2nd, join me and rally support from your friends, family, colleagues, and members of the sports law community by using the hashtag #GoNuts and nominate Labo on your social media sites. You can also support the campaign by downloading the Go Nuts and Nominate Labo pictures and posting them to your sites. The links to those photos are below this video. 3rd and finally, spread the word about the nomination, whether it's with a retweet or word of mouth. Seriously, without you guys spreading the word, the likelihood of landing in the ABA Blog 100 looks bleak. And as always, thank you for your support and loyalty to the show. All of this, and I mean all of this, and more, would not be possible without you guys. Anyway, that's the show. Leave all your comments down below, and be sure to visit Law and Batting Order at lawandbattingorder.com, as well as on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Take care, guys. play in sports. Whether you go to a football stadium or a baseball field, you're bound to see some type of signage belonging to a popular beverage company or office appliance store. And especially in this day and age, with superstar athletes becoming worldwide phenomena, sponsors come knocking on those players' doors and ask them to be the face of their product. But what goes exactly into a sponsorship deal, and what are some of the legal concerns that come up in sponsorship deals? To help us understand the business of sports and sponsorships, it is my privilege and honor to introduce Rob Cardenas, who is an attorney based in Las Vegas. In addition to being a personal injury litigator, he is also an MMA agent and runs the top booking agency for UFC Talent called MMA Appearances, and has dealt with endorsement and sponsorship deals in the MMA. Rob, welcome to Law and Batting Order. How's it going, man?
Hey, thanks for having me on, Tony. I really appreciate the opportunity.
My pleasure. Now, let me just make a disclaimer that we are entering the octagon of sports law, but I'm by no means a John Bones Jones or Anderson Silva or Chris Weidman. So even though I'm not as talented as those guys, I'm sure we'll have a great discussion.
No, I'm sure we will, and I appreciate, again, the opportunity. It's an honor and privilege to be on the show.
Thank you very much. So why don't we just start with a little introduction. Tell the audience a little bit about the legal work that you do, including the sponsorship work that you've done in the past.
Sure. I'm a personal injury litigator in Las Vegas with the law firm of Benson, Bertoldo, Baker & Carter, an AV-rated personal injury firm here. I've been practicing law in Nevada for approximately 13 years. The entirety of my career, from a legal standpoint, has been involved in litigation practice. The first half of my career, I was an insurance defense attorney representing insurers and insurance companies.
Closer Mariano Rivera, who will be going to his last MLB All-Star Game. Other notable players going to this year's All-Star Game are reigning AL MVP Miguel Cabrera, current AL MVP candidate Chris Davis, and former Met and current Cardinal Carlos Beltran. I was a Nets fan back in the day when the team played in New Jersey. Seeing the success of the team with Jason Kidd, Kerry Kittles, and Kenyon Martin was great, but it had to endure many years of suffering when the team had losing seasons. But since the move to Brooklyn, the Nets have rebranded themselves and have made themselves a hot commodity in the NBA. This became apparent so far this offseason as the Nets have made some official trades and signings official. This week, the Nets completed a trade with the Celtics that sends Paul Pierce, Jason Terry, and Kevin Garnett to the Nets in exchange for some draft picks and other Nets players. The Nets didn't stop there as they made it. Welcome to a brand new episode of Law and Batting Order. I'm your host, Tony Iliakostas. Here are some quick hits from the past 2 weeks. The MLB All-Star Game is around the corner and the rosters have been assembled. The Midsummer Classic, which is pretty much Christmas for all baseball fans, features some of the best talent around the league. Since the game will be held in Citi Field, home of my hometown New York Mets, Mets fans will see captain David Wright and pitching sensation Matt Harvey represent the blue and orange. And because this is New York, I would be remiss to not give a shout out to Yankee Club. A huge steal in picking up Andrei Kirilenko to a 2-year deal worth $3 million. While we have yet to see this monstrosity of a team play, it looks like the Nets will battle for the ultimate crown, the NBA Championship Trophy. History was made at Wimbledon last Sunday as one of Britain's very own won the men's Wimbledon title. Hometown kid Andy Murray battled Novak Djokovic in the title match. While the battle was tough, Andy Murray beat number 1 seeded Djokovic in 3 sets. Murray's win at Wimbledon brought cheers to Britain as Murray became the first British player to win Wimbledon in 77 years and the first Scottish tennis player of either sex to win Wimbledon in 117 years. Over on the women's side, French player Marion Bartoli took home the women's Wimbledon title, beating Sabine Lichty in 2 sets. Today's Order in the Court will discuss the role that sponsorships